Lucia, thank you very much. And my thanks too to Terry colleagues for inviting me to be on this particular panel at the end of the summit. It was an invitation I deliberated about for a while. It did seem somewhat odd to be sharing a panel in a session of this kind, but it was useful because it made me rethink some of the ways in which the green movement today, the broader sustainability movement, is addressing this whole issue about gender gaps. And I must say, for me, it raised all over again some very deep misgivings about the language that we use and the way we frame the discourse about narrowing gender gaps in the world today. I need to go back a bit to explain why I feel that deep misgiving about how we frame this particular discourse. I need to go back to the early 1970s, which was the time when I first got involved in green politics. And I must say then radicalism meant something a little bit different. It actually meant going back to the roots of the problems that we faced then and pretty much the same problems that we face in the world today. But the debates were a little bit different. The limits to growth debate was very live. There was an extremely active debate all the time about population. And one of the most influential strands in that debate was ecofeminism. Now, some ecofeminists, in pursuit of a radical unearthing of the causes behind these problems, would go a long, long way back. They'd go back to the time of matriarchal Europe, where human societies were seen as and experienced themselves as part of a much bigger cosmological whole, with the divine represented in countless manifestations of the earth goddess, put to the sword, of course, by wave after wave of Aryan invaders, bringing with them their warrior sky gods, the antecedents to today's warring Abrahamic religions. Some ecofeminists went back to a different, more secular set of insights into why our society is so dysfunctional, to the time in relatively modern history when the likes of René Descartes and Francis Bacon set out to reduce the living earth to a clock-like, mechanistic automaton, to assault the earth, to force her secrets from her, to conquer, dominate, to rape. Now, as a relative adolescent in the green movement at that time, this debate was my intellectual nourishment. It was the culture in which I grew up. Now, we don't talk like that these days, I've noticed. Not much. So why am I going back to those days now? I'm going back for one simple but very disturbing reason. I fear deeply for the prospects of the sustainability movement today, not because of a lack of technological solutions, not because of a lack of a compelling economic rationale to do things differently, not even eventually because of a lack of political radicalism to address that tiny elite of the super rich who still dominate our lives. My fear is a different one, because I fear that in our movement today and in the world at large, not enough young boys and young men are being raised in such a way as to understand their critical and continuing role in challenging patriarchy today. Ours is still a world grotesquely disfigured by patriarchy. Now, to make that assertion here in India will hardly come as a surprise, where acts of absolutely horrific sexual violence against women are all too common. The Western media are fascinated by that pattern of sexual violence in India. We hear rather less about equally horrific patterns of sexual violence in the West. In the United States, it is the expectation that 1 in 4 women will end up as a victim of rape. In random surveys in different countries and different cities in the US, over the last 10 years, more than 50% of women acknowledged that they were sexually abused before the age of 18. 1 woman is beaten up by a male partner every 20 seconds. Patriarchal socialization shapes the consciousness of both sexes. And today, the ubiquity of pornographic material is actively corrupting the values and perversely influencing the behaviors of young men all over the world. That, on top of what we've already heard about very eloquently from fellow speakers on this panel, that women worldwide contribute 2/3 of the hours worked, earn 1/10 of the income, and own a lot less than 1/100th of the property in the world today. So when I hear people celebrate the odd tokenistic or symbolic breaking of the glass ceiling, or I hear people celebrate their ability to narrow or even eliminate gender gaps, a little bit of me doesn't quite buy that. It seems to me that this is a world that demands a very different quality of political leadership. And for me, after 40 years in this world, almost all of the inspirational examples of political leadership that I can turn to are women. There is something about that we need to just reflect on, because when it comes to sustainable development, it is my own personal experience that men find it incredibly difficult to understand that they have an ongoing role in combating deep structural patriarchy in society. They find it incredibly difficult to shift to a more holistic, compassionate view of the world, and they find it very difficult to open themselves up to a more empathetic relationship, not just an intellectual relationship, but an empathetic relationship with those people, and predominantly those women, whose lives are still devastated by the lack of energy, water, and food security. And that, I think, is why I miss the contribution of ecofeminism to our rather emaciated political debate today.